Okay, a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If we could take our seats. The faster we get started, the faster we get to the cocktail hour. That's sort of the motivation. No, not really. We actually also have a great panel here and a lot of interesting stuff to come ahead. But I do want to give you a little flash forward as well to what's going to happen at the end of the session as well. But first of all, I hope you enjoyed the think tanks. As Louis said, they're often one of our most popular features, and it seemed like a lot of buzz and discussion. So I think there's always value to group breaking into smaller groups and doing that. And now we come back out and reflect again together. I think this session we should have a bit more chance for interaction as well, since we have a few fewer presenters. So we'll be looking to engage you in the audience as much as possible. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. There's evaluation forms on the desks in front of you. You also would have all gotten them when you registered at the registration desk. Can you please just take a minute or two to fill those in between now and the end of the conference, or between now and when you're leaving? You can return it to the reg desk outside where you would have checked in. It really helps to inform us of what we need to do to improve, what innovations we can bring. You can tell us anything from the specific panel suggestions to the location, to time of year, etc. And we really do look carefully at every form that comes back. So take a few minutes to do that. We have a little prize draw at the end of the conference. It's not quite an Apple Watch or an iPhone, I'm afraid, but there's still some little treat from England we hope you'll enjoy. So please do take a few minutes to do that. At the end of this session, we will be ferried off, more or less directly, some minutes afterwards, to the Atlanta History Center for the Ryder-hosted gala dinner. It's really going to be a great evening, some fantastic food and entertainment, and more importantly, some chance for you to come together and continue the networking and to make the connections that we've been fostering here throughout the day. As I said, we're talking about digitalization, digital connections, but we need these social networking interactions and connections as well for that to really work. After the gala dinner, we will also then have coaches taking you to the Afterglow party, which is it's very close to the Atlanta History Center at Gypsy Kitchen. This is hosted by Sogere, and that's going to push you to the limit of fun and innovation with music and maybe dancing, and again, as Louis said, very important business and discussions as well. And then we can test you in the morning just to see how well you recover as well. So we expect to see you all here bright and early, maybe a little bleary-eyed, but still ready to engage and continue on. So that's sort of what's going to happen in this evening. We look forward to the time with you. And one other thing we're going to do this session, after we have our presentations and the Q&A, Louis mentioned in the beginning we have our Automotive Logistics Live, which is a kind of app or service via our website where we stream this conference around the world. And you can also access it in the room here, and it gives you a chance to make comments, ask questions. You can also message other delegates directly, for example. And another thing is that we can do some live voting in which we get results and polls. So we're going to do some polling at the end of this session. But to sort of get you in the mood or give you a flavor for it, we'll do a little test run, so to say. We want to get as many people logged in now, so that hopefully it takes a little bit less time at the end as well. So the way you do that, you can follow the link which you see up there. There's a bit.ly link with AL Supply Chain Live on it. You'd also have that in your program. You would have also received an email this morning around 8 a.m., which would have had a link to all this. You need your email address, and you need your delegate number, which starts 195, and it's on your badge. It's printed on your badge, so you can just pull it right off there. That's your password. And again, you had an email around 8 a.m., I think, or so this morning, where you would have that link too. Takes a minute or two to do, but it's worth it. It's worth it to see. It gives you a chance to interact with each other a bit more as well. And I think the polling, it's always a good opportunity to sort of take the temperature of the room, so to say. We have a few questions from a few of our sponsors, and then a few questions from us as well, on a couple of trends in a sense. And we also this is streamed live, so actually it gives some people outside the room the chance to kind of participate in the conference as well and give their voice. So hopefully some of you will do that and sign on. You can do it now. We'll put our first question up, which is a very important topic, one of the burning issues in supply chain. So it's a little reference to what Louis said. Which of your moderators today has the more innovative haircut? Would it be Louis or would it be me? So if you can just, during the session at some point, sign on, give your vote. At the end of the session, we'll reveal the score, and then we'll move on to other important trends. I mean, I'm not sure there's any as important quite as one's haircut, but nevertheless, that's just obviously a little bit of fun just to test you getting on it. So we'll leave the question open. More importantly, sign on, check out the live site, make a question, make some comments and suggestions, and then we'll have some real voting at the end to have a little bit of fun with that as well. Okay, back to this session, which is the factory of the future, defining the shape of tomorrow's automotive production operations. So already, we've spoken quite a bit already today. We've heard from a number of speakers about what's driving digitalization or Industry 4.0 or advanced manufacturing, business analytics, however you want to kind of term it. We talked about trends like connectivity, autonomy, electrification, shared mobility as some of the sort of key drivers, and of course the impacts that they're having or will have on supply chain and logistics. We've had some examples from companies like Ryder and Subaru about what's happening or changing in their organizations and operations to manage this, or other industries like Electrolux in the appliance sector. And then here we've invited two really leading experts in this space to, I don't know, probably take us a bit deeper into the meaning and dynamics of some of what's going on for Factory of the Future or for changes in the supply chain. Whether we're talking about modular production or decentralized production control, cooperative robotics, data analytics, many topics like that. But of course, our speakers have had the chance a little bit over the course of the day to listen to what's said, so we'll probably have some reflections across what they think of that so far. And I think we'll also spend a little bit of time on some of the challenges and maybe stumbling blocks that come along the way. None of this is easy to predict or to see. And as was said this morning, it's not quite just a big box of cereal that we're dealing with here. So I look forward to some interesting and thought-provoking presentations, and then we'll be turning to you for some questions to provoke it further. So we're going to have two presentations. First, we're going to hear from Jim Bydalek, who's the Vice President of Digital, Automotive, and Aerospace from CapGemini, and Scott Dewicki, who's a leadership partner at Gartner. So again, look forward to both presentations. Jim, the floor is yours. Thanks.
So good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay? All right. So I did have the opportunity to listen to everybody today, to watch the material that was being presented, and I had a choice to make. Stick with the original presentation that I created where I talked about some quotes from industry leaders. I looked at how there's a technology push and a market pull for what we've been talking about. I talked about how we need data, innovation, really to drive a transformational culture, and what the Industry 4.0 framework looks like in terms of the basic pieces of the puzzle that fit together to create Industry 4.0 within a manufacturing facility. I also looked at what business value would be anticipated, some of the key enablers for success, as well as lessons learned. I said, well, after listening to today's presentations, one, there's a lot of material that we've already talked about, and two, it just sounds really boring. So I'm going to take a risk and go off script and skip a whole bunch of my beginning slides, and I'm going to tell two stories. One about an article that I read yesterday, and one about a conversation I had with my son. And believe me, I'll wrap it back around as to how it's relevant for Industry 4.0 and how it truly does have a meaningful impact on what we're trying to do today and what tomorrow is going to look like and the risks that we're going to be under that we have to address. So before we do that, I'd like to understand a few things about the audience. So I'm also going to take advantage of this red and green sheet that we have in front of us to understand who you are. So it was nice that they're there. I didn't know they were going to be there. But before we start, I want to understand a little bit about the organizations that are here. And it's really one simple question. Are you a for-profit organization or a non-profit organization? If you're for-profit, show me green. If you're non-profit, show me red. Just as expected. Oh, there's one red. What's your organization? Pardon me? Ah. You still want to make money, though. I know LA, and they're going to want to make money. So, yeah, the longshoremen make money. But you're not in it to lose money. Absolutely not. So let's talk about the article first. And again, I'm going to use the green and red card to ask two questions. One, I want you to show me the green card if you know who Elizabeth Billington is. If you don't, show me the red. Not a single green card. Is that a green card back there? No? No green card? Red card. All reds. Who knows who Elton John is? You got to talk to some. There you go. Now you turned it to green. 100% red on the profit versus nonprofit, or green for profit. 100% red on Elizabeth Billington. No one knows who the hell she is. And then Elton John, everybody knows who he is. So why is that relevant? Well, we've got to go all the way back to 1800. And just yesterday, the article that I was referring to was in the BBC Business article written by a gentleman named Tim Hartford. I don't know who Tim is. I read it on the plane on the way here. And it was fascinating. It talked about Elizabeth Billington in the 1800s, and she was the #1 English soprano singer ever in the 1800s. She was fantastic. It was referred to as singing to the angels. And she would sell out her concerts. There were bidding wars for her to actually go to that venue and participate. And if I look at her today, her success, she would make in today's money, according to the article, about $1 million. Contrast that with Elton John, who in 2015 made $100 million. And an economist said, why is there that gap? What happened? If you put it in relative terms, a #1 singer versus a #1 singer, what created that gap? So he went and studied, and you got to go all the way back to when the first phonograph was invented, the cylinder, where they could actually record a human's voice and play it back. And you could do that recording, and you could record maybe 2, 4 at a time. So if you sang a song 50 times in a day, you'd come out with maybe 400, 200, 400 recordings, and depending on how many they did at once, because they looked at the economic opportunity to record and sell somebody performing with their voice. Then when the disc recording came out, you could actually exponentially create more and sell those. And then the business opportunity of selling that music enhanced by radio and by film and now by MP3 players. The ability to hit that mass audience was tremendous. Elton John was able to take advantage of that. So though that they were doing the same thing, there was an evolution of technology that took place that created this financial gap. Might be seeing why I asked if you were a profit or a nonprofit organization. And the people that were able to take advantage of that gap benefited from it. And it started this whole process around this winner-take-all mentality in the performance industry. And so there were individuals that could take advantage of that technology and become the big winners. But along with the big winners, there were some pretty big losers. Because where people used to make a decent living performing, maybe you couldn't see the best, but you could see the second best, and those were your only two options. People would pay to go see the second best or the third best. When they had a choice to either buy a recording of the best or go see the second best, they chose the recording of the best. And the second best, that were used to be making a decent wage, now couldn't pay their bills, couldn't put food on the table. And that created that winner-take-all mentality. That same situation occurred in sports, where before you'd make money based on how you could fill up a stadium. With the advent of satellite TV and the ability to broadcast worldwide sports, the gap between those that were okay and those that were fantastic became huge. And it was an evolution. And that created that gap between the winners and the losers. And it created a bigger and bigger gap between the winners and losers. And as you're doing that, when David Bowie, again going back to the music industry in 2002, he said that the music industry is going to be like running water, cheap and readily available. As a warning to all the other musicians that were fighting this MP3, that were fighting the digital release of their music. And he said, touring, getting back to the live shows, is going to be the only way to uniquely differentiate yourself. And he was right. Because right now, in the music industry, the top 1% make, I want to make sure I get the numbers right, make 5 times more in concert sales than the bottom 95% combined in the music industry. And that's a stunning statistic. And where they used to basically use concerts to sell albums, they now use albums and their music to sell concerts. See a lot of groups coming back together and going live and going on tour. And that's a good example of technology evolution, the impact that hits you over a very long period of time. So now I've got to contrast that with a conversation I had with my son. I'm going to use the red and green cards again. Who has a child or had a child that reached a certain age at some point in their life where they knew everything? Green if they know everything, red if they haven't ever experienced that. Yeah, mostly green. For those of you that are red, either you have no children or they're really, really young right now because they will reach an age. I've got a 19-year-old son, and he's reached that age where he's in college, and he's attending a few classes and learning some theories and philosophies, and he knows everything. And one of the things that he asked me throughout my career, because I've been in automotive for about 30 years, in consulting, so he likes to ask, Dad, what do you do? And it's kind of hard to tell an 8-year-old what a consultant does. But a 19-year-old that knows everything, I knew this was a setup question. And so we were out a few weeks ago turkey hunting, and there's a lot of time where you're just sitting there waiting. And he said, Dad, what do you do? Tell me again what you do. So I tried to be a little creative in explaining my answer, and I said, I changed the world. He called BS on that and said, no, you don't. I know you, Dad. You do not change the world. And I said, no, I truly believe that I do in some way or another. And I talked to him about different topics around technology that he's experienced, that he's used to, that he likes. One of them was a Fitbit. Who wears a health device? Yep. Who's familiar with the murder in Connecticut where a Fitbit was used to identify a murderer? Yeah. She moved after the husband said she was dead. She actually walked around the house. A lot of steps were taken, a lot of time, big gap. I think yesterday he confessed. But a Fitbit was used, big data was used to capture and collect data that identified a murderer. My son uses Apple Music, music on demand, a technology to provide information to him when he wants it at the time he wants to be entertained. I talked about in Pennsylvania the smart garbage cans that they have to optimize the collection of the garbage and the routing to save on fuel and to save on labor costs. I talked about a 14-year-old that invented a dog video chat with the ability to remotely activate a treat dispenser so she could video chat with her pet and provide a treat and reward them for good behavior. Interesting technology, not the way I'd want to train my dog, but nonetheless, it was out there. I talked about in sports a smart jersey, which is used for entertainment that you can wear, and one of the football players is also wearing a jersey with sensors, and you can feel the impact points as that person is playing the game. I also talked about a smart helmet with sensors to use in the healthcare to study concussions, to identify when someone might have a concussion when they don't know that they have a concussion, for the safety of the players. We talked about virtual reality gaming, because he likes to wear the goggles and play the games, as a type of technology that's out there. All part explaining what I do. We talked about augmented reality, the Pokemon Go phenomenon, where my 3-year-old granddaughter is using an iPhone to walk around the city to catch little creatures. We talked about our drone. We had a drone over here. Flying the drone, being able to look at the logs, determine how do you optimize battery life on the drone? How does it scan pictures with a FLIR camera? My son-in-law is a police officer, and he's just been put in charge of their first drone program to identify perps, to identify risk areas, to identify threats, to use in search and rescue as a way to optimize their routines. We talked about a time that we were with my son-in-law, and we got an opportunity, my son and I, to go into a simulator, a police simulator, a 360-degree, everywhere you look, you have the goggles on, you have the suit on, and you're in an active shooter situation. And when you get shot, you get zapped by an electrical charge. And it was fascinating. And they use it for training. My son was using it for entertainment, but they use it for training to save lives. We talked about how many of these things are started via Kickstarter or the GoFundMe page, a brand new way of doing commerce. Those are all technologies that drive different characteristics. And if we look at Industry 4.0 and we call it a revolution as opposed to an evolution, and what these plants of the future are going to look like, they're going to be using not just one technology or two, the ability to record a human voice or to watch a video, but technology to get what you want now, to use technology and data to investigate and identify problems, and to predict things. When is a machine going to break down? When is my part going to start coming out with quality that's unacceptable? We talked about how that technology and data changes the way that you interact with humans, changes the way that you interact with machines. Nowadays, you have to know how a robot thinks when you start going into the artificial intelligence and the cognitive intelligence that machines are starting to gain. We talked about how it's changing the way that people need to be trained, changing the way that they learn. I never would have imagined when I had my first daughter that my 3-year-old granddaughter would be walking around with a device more complex than any technology I've ever held up to that point, and intuitively know how to use it to catch Pokemon. And then when she's bored, how to exit out of it, go into YouTube, find her Disney Channel, and watch Minnie Mouse. That's our future. How to use technology and data to create a safer environment. Those are the characteristics of our plants of the future, in a cleaner environment. So I told them, that's what I do. I use technology, and I use data, and I change the world, one organization, one plant at a time. Integrating that technology, integrating that data together to change the world. So for us in this room, we've got to look at it and say, there are no more outsiders. When we talk about integrating things together, collaboration, data and communication, everything's up for grabs. Our competition is going to change, our products are going to change, our services are going to change, and it's going to be done via the technology that's enabling Industry 4.0 within a manufacturing plant. The ability of technology and the ability to utilize that technology and that data is going to change who are the winners and who are the losers. And that gap that we talked about in the entertainment industry, maybe that took 100 years. We're compressing that down sometimes to months or weeks in how technology is evolving. So not to try to put the fear of God into people, but it's really shaping what that factory of the future looks like. And as all of these pieces of the puzzle fit together within this revolution, I just have to ask this team, which side of that gap do you want to be on? And I'm guessing, because of all the green cards for for-profit organization, it's on the side of the winners. So to do that, we'll get into a couple of the slides on the enablers and the lessons learned throughout that. But you need to embrace technology, and you need to, one of the key themes that came out over the last few days, or few presentations, was embrace the culture within your organization to drive that type of change. And because the future, after I got done explaining this all to my son, and he never got a turkey, he said, "You're helping plants do that? Why aren't they doing it today?" Because he already sees it. And his expectation was, well, everybody's already using everything that's out there because I can use it. And so I didn't have an answer for that. I said, I go back to, we're gray-haired people and we are hard to change. But we have to change. And we have to have that type of strategy for enablement. So I'm gonna skip wherever I point this to. The quotes from the industry leaders, the technology push and the market pull, you guys can get all this. The information at the speed of light, the innovation and openness and transformation that's required to embrace this, kind of what a framework looks like, my typical consulting slide. The expected benefits throughout your organization within the supply chain and what organizations are targeting today. And don't worry about reading this because we'll make this available. And jump to the enablers. How is it going to work within the plant? What needs to take place? You need to have an agile and collaborative network that's been mentioned several times this morning and this afternoon. That supply chain needs to be connected. There are no outsiders anymore. Connected everything. Decentralized market-driven production control. Production control, yeah, it's something that we've kind of centralized. It's this old dinosaur that we manage. It's going to change. We're going to have orders coming in off the fly, flexible, agile manufacturing processes, robots that can interpret it and recognize when a change is needed and automatically make that change. Integrated engineering throughout the organization, from product design all the way through services. Cybersecurity is going to be very important. We've talked about who's going to own the data, but how do you protect the data? Once you have data, there are regulations, but it also becomes discoverable. So how do you retain it for legal issues? And then the data analytics are all the enablers that are going to allow the winners to separate themselves from the losers. And I know Scott's going to talk a little bit about this also in terms of the challenges and the risks that you're going to undertake. And then finally, the lessons learned. An open ecosystem of partnership. Sounds great. Very hard to do. Partnering within people and getting people and organizations to agree upon things is very difficult. Develop a value-driven, meaning business value, meaning we're for-profit organizations, so we want it to fund itself. We want it to drive to the bottom line. And pragmatic approach, something that's doable. I like the Subaru example and what they did, you know, the perfect kind of trifecta of a new model launch, of a new line, and new processes and systems going in simultaneously. They pulled it off, and that's fantastic. But they'll also be the first to tell you that there were challenges. Proof of concept, agile proof of concept, that was illustrated earlier as well. Determine where you're going to have your scatter gun, put all the holes, and then use the rifle to target in on those standard processes and approaches and technology. Fail fast, succeed faster. The concept of failure is not an option, doesn't really apply, because you have this mass amounts of data, you're not quite sure where the value is going to come from, and you're going to have to fail in some areas in order to find where those nuggets of gold are that you can use and mine through your data. Align your digital strategy with your business strategy, and don't forget the cultural impact. You have to go into this knowing that it's an organizational change that's taking place, and your culture is going to change. And then finally, onboard IT as a business partner and master your data. The old adage, garbage in, garbage out, still holds true. If you have bad data coming in, you're going to have bad data or bad information going out and bad decisions being made. Now, one of the advantages that we have in the IoT world is that the data is machine driven, so it's still bits and bytes, and you have control over how that data is processed. So you're not doing the textual analysis. Though some of the new technology around cognitive thinking, voice recognition, natural language recognition, multi-language recognition is going to alleviate a lot of that as well. So again, I ask you to ask yourself, what side of that gap do you want to be on? And make those decisions, recognizing the cultural change, the workforce change, the automation that's going to come in, and the collaboration and partnership with others that you may consider outside your traditional ecosystem. So thank you very much, and I appreciate, again, the opportunity to come up and speak, and look forward to questions later.
Jim, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I think that was more than just a presentation. That was a business lesson, a life lesson, perhaps a parenting lesson, above all. Very insightful. It's also very exciting because by your own admission, you are all Elton John as opposed to a 19th century English opera singer, which bodes well for the gala dinner and afterglow party. So I do expect to see some yellow feather boas and some rather extravagant dresses and singing tonight to prove that you're really on the winning side. But I think, again, challenging, showing us the value and importance of data, and obviously the key points that you saw there in terms of some of the lessons and the steps along the way. As Jim said, after the conference, so early next week, you'll get a link that'll give you links to all the presentations that can be made available, also to the videos and photos. So just in case you were scrambling to take photos, and as Jim mentioned, so you will have those available to you. I want to now invite Scott Dewicki from Gartner.
Thank you. When I was starting to work on this presentation, I took a similar approach that I suspect Jim took with his as well, which was to start talking about a lot of facts and figures, and I started doing a lot of research, and I started having a point of view and so on. And then I read a book by Thomas Friedman just recently, and if you haven't read it or picked up a copy, I encourage you to. It's called Thank You for Being Late. And Thomas Friedman is the guy who about, 15 years ago or so, wrote a book called The World is Flat. And Thank You for Being Late is as much a seminal work, I think, as The World is Flat is, because it contextualizes many of the things that we've been talking about today. And after I started reading it, I got about halfway through the book and I was thinking about this presentation, and I completely scrapped everything I was doing and I started over. Because what I realized is that there's a lot more going on than just talking about production, talking about how the pieces fit together, talking about analytics and digitization and 3D printing and all the rest. And so I completely scrapped the original idea and started again. So some of the context of what I'm going to be talking about is very much based upon the idea and some of the ideas that are represented by Thomas Friedman that reinforces what we've been seeing from a Gartner perspective in terms of the research that we're doing, talking with many of you actually as both OEMs and suppliers and service providers of various kinds, as well as the things that we're seeing in other industries as well. So that gives the kind of a little bit of the flavor for what I'll be talking about. One of the things that made me pause in the Thomas Friedman book was he presents the fact that in 2007, the world fundamentally changed, that lots of things all happened in 2007, and you would not have been able to appreciate or understand or even predict in 2006 the manifest changes in society, in government, in public perception, in the consumer, in business, in everything about everything that happened in 2007. So what were some of the things that happened in 2007? The iPhone was introduced. Google Android was introduced. The Kindle was introduced. Think about the profound impact that the smartphone and the end of the printed book has had on the globe, on the society, on people's expectation of government, of privacy, of photography, of everything. It's all about the smartphone. The smartphone has as much power in it today as supercomputers did 20 years ago. Supercomputers. And it's in the palm of your hand. We are living Moore's Law. But Moore's Law isn't just about semiconductors now. It's not just about computers now. It's not just about memory now. It's about everything that we talk about. We are living on the Moore's Law curve. Another example that he talked about was that in 2007, AT&T introduced something called the software-enabled network. And what that is, in the past, prior to 2007, if you wanted a faster network infrastructure, you had to upgrade hardware. You had to put in new wire. You had to add more pipes to get more stuff going through it. And what AT&T said is the iPhone is coming. And the iPhone was going to increase radically the amount of data that was needed in the pipes. And they realized that there was just no way they could invest that much money to make the iPhone successful. And so they changed to a software-enabled network design. They virtualized the network, and they were able to cram literally trillions of times more data on the same pipes than they were in the old days of just upgrading hardware. At the same time that happened, Intel comes out, and they introduce a brand new chip technology that completely reinvents the rules around what we thought about the physics of microelectronics. And so it became so much cheaper, so much more powerful, so much smaller, with so much more capacity and capability that we were able to put chips into everything. All of that happened in 2007. So let me start with that and let that just kind of sink in for the moment. I'll bet that very few of you can remember life without a smartphone. And that was just in 2006. And that was just 10 years ago. You've seen statistics like this before. We predict at Gartner that somewhere by 2020 there will be about 21 billion smart devices from the Internet of Things out there in the world collecting information, monitoring information, doing something. 21 billion, and that's conservative. It could actually be much higher. We're also predicting that by 2022, one of the really amazing things is that this technology, this collision of all of these different capabilities is going to result in new ways of thinking about maintenance and savings and service and consumables, leading ultimately to as much as $1 trillion in cumulative savings by 2022. Augmented reality, Jim talked about that. Augmented reality is unbelievably powerful. If you think about the ability to put information floating in space in front of some user operating on a machine tool, operating on doing a repair for an automobile or doing anything, putting that power into the hands of a consumer to go shopping. Now you're talking about sitting in an automobile and putting the specs of that automobile in space in front, or holding up a smartphone. If you've ever been into the Lego store, for example, and they've got the smart boxes, that's augmented reality. You hold up the smart box under a camera, and it shows you on a picture what that thing looks like assembled. That's augmented reality. It's cool stuff. And we suspect that by 2020, more than 100 million consumers will be shopping using augmented reality technology. So it's coming. And here's the important thing. We talk about how valuable digital information is. The companies that are leading this revolution, there are 7 of them. And one of the things that we're predicting is within just 4 years, 1/5 of everything that we do, everything we do is going to be touched somehow by just 7 companies: Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, etc. 7 companies control with some relationship to 1/5, 20% of everything we do as individuals. That is enormously powerful. So, with that as a backdrop, there we go. With that as the backdrop, what do we think of, what do I think of as the future of the factory of the future? I don't have a clue. Thank you very much. But the reality is no one else does either, really. We can see maybe a couple of years down the road. But if you think about where we were in 2006 versus 2007, what does the next 10 years look like of the factory of the future? Who knows? Who knows? The collisions are happening from a social perspective, a political perspective, an environmental perspective, a technological perspective. Things are getting faster. We are on the Moore's Law curve. We are riding it. And it's vastly outstripping our ability. This is one of the other ideas in the Thomas Friedman book. The rate of change is itself increasing. So we're not on this linear slope of change. We are on an exponential curve of change. And so our ability to assimilate it and understand what the future holds and get out ahead of it is outstripping our ability as human beings to be able to accommodate any of it. So with that, Gartner predicts that even given all of that enormous amount of change, that enormous amount of technological, I guess you could call it progress, 3 out of 5 IoT projects in manufacturing will still only yield benefits at the local plants, at the local level. So we can talk about, and this is just next year, it's only a year out accordingly, and we've got lots of experiments and proof of concepts going on. But most of what we're seeing, most of what people are trying is really at the local level. These are site-level projects that people are trying from an Internet of Things perspective, at least in terms of manufacturing. So, why is it? First, it's hard. It's hard. Plants are messy, they're loud, they're complicated, lots of things are going on. Machine tools are moving, people are moving, material is moving, lots of things are happening. Plants are complicated, almost organic entities in their own right. So saying, and I think to Jim's point, he pointed this out too, saying that you're going to connect this thing end to end, lots of plants talking to one another, coming up with lots of interesting things, connecting it to the customer, becoming more demand-driven, all of those kinds of wonderful things, that's really hard to do. It's really hard to do. It's difficult to scale, at least right now. But one of the interesting comments, and I heard somebody mention this during one of the think tanks, they were talking about how much data and what's important, what should we be saving, and trying to sort through all of that. One of the interesting things that we see, however, is that storage and computational power, because of the cloud and because of technologies like Hadoop, it's practically free to store data. Computational power is practically free. So rather than try to figure out what to store, just store all of it. And let the algorithms figure out what's important and what's not important. Yeah, you're going to have to use some human judgment in there to kind of sift through some of the chaff. But there's too much of it. And it's accumulating too fast. And one of the things that we're finding is that from a manufacturing perspective, one of the least used assets is plant data. So just store all of it. Let the data scientists come up with the algorithms to sort through it and figure out what's important and what's not. There's also too much focus, emphasis still on site-level excellence. If you look at the experiments that we're seeing, some of the early projects we're seeing, it's still about improving cost, schedule, and performance of the plant. But if we think about time and outcome and persistence and quality and those kinds of things, those things are higher order. And they require more than just site-level excellence. They require connectivity to the outside world. And so that's one of the limitations that we see, where we tend to be siloed within our own plant environments instead of reaching out and branching out. But the real benefit comes when you can make those connections to the outside world, because you're no longer thinking in terms of trying to optimize the efficiency of the plant. In fact, in some of the best business models we've seen in our research, when you start from the point of view of what the customer is willing to pay you for in a profitable way, and you work back from that point to the beginning to what your plants need to do, you might actually be sub-optimizing what the plants are doing. You might be underutilizing the plant. But if it's the right decision for the company, and it's the most profitable decision for the company overall, then why do you care? You all held up your green cards. You're in the business to make money. If the result is more money by sub-optimizing the plant, why wouldn't you do it? But that requires integrated metrics, it requires alignment, it requires governance, it requires process, it requires lots of things. But it requires getting out of our site-level mentalities and behaviors and cultures. I talked about the data fragmentation. Data quality, obviously, one of the key considerations. And master data management, MDM, is one of the really tough challenges when it comes to analytics, when it comes to data science, and so forth. But what we find is that the asset, the corporate asset that is associated with manufacturing data continues to be underutilized. That information is critically important to understand what the capabilities of the company are and what decisions you can make for it in the larger sense that drives customer-focused outcomes. So what we see is the best companies beginning to get their arms around it. They're connecting their MES systems to model-based manufacturing, to product lifecycle management, to ERP, and trying to figure out what does all of that data together tell us, and how can we make better business decisions, make more profitable decisions that yield better results for customers. And quite frankly, and this is being candid, most of the benefits that we talk about, most of the hype around the Internet of Things and around the factory of the future, a lot of it has been overhyped, just like everything else. And anything that comes along new, it's the better mousetrap. It's going to change the world. We're all going to be sitting on the beach and letting machines do whatever. We're all going to be living in the matrix. And the reality is that might happen eventually. But right now, what we're seeing is that most of what we talk about doesn't quite live up to the hype. But eventually, we're going to figure out how to use these technologies in a way which are really effective. And by the way, this curve, we call this our hype cycle at Gartner, where you have what's called a peak of inflated expectations, where the world is going to be different, we're all going to be singing Kumbaya, and we're all going to be living in some utopia someplace. And then you get off the peak and you end up in what's called the trough of disillusionment. I also call this the date curve. It was a joke. Okay. So what should you be doing? Well, in order to avoid losing the race, and I think Jim pointed this out as well, we're in a race, and you all want to be on the winning side. So some of the things that you want to start focusing on now, first of all, challenge your organizations to think differently. Find the mavericks, the millennials, the renegades. Find the square pegs who just don't want to be tied down to site-level operational metrics. And they want to change the world. They want to be dreamers. The millennials are really good at that. But there are people, I'll bet, assuming that hasn't been drummed out of them because they've been in manufacturing sites their whole career. And I imagine if they really are renegades, they probably got moved someplace else fairly quickly. But find those people who really want to think and do something different. Give them the amount of resource. This could be 10%. We call it, by the way, in Gartner, we call it bimodal strategy. Mode 1 is business, is run the business, improve the business, continuous improvement. Mode 2 is innovate. Do something different, think differently, behave differently, experiment, fail fast. Figure out how to scale. Find those people who are the renegades, the dreamers, and figure out how to get them to be doers. Govern them with a light touch, and get them to imagine a future that has never been. Secondly, and this is repeating kind of the words that have been said before, connect. There's an awful lot of operational technology out there that's coming from your plants. There's an awful lot of IT out there for planning and so forth that manufacturing data could really do a world of good for. And connect your supply chains. And I don't just mean procurement and sourcing or materials management, logistics. I mean all of that, all of that. Supply chain is an integrated end-to-end animal now. It's not one function. It's not just logistics. It's not just purchasing. It's not just materials management. It's not just manufacturing. It's all of it. It's not just order fulfillment. It's also planning. It's also product lifecycle management. It's also new product introduction. That is all now considered supply chain. So start connecting things together and removing barriers. Start thinking about appropriate levels of risk. But keep in mind that risk is going to be a real thing. You're going to be on a roller coaster. We're all going to be on a roller coaster for a very long time. But the new threats could come from anywhere. One of the things that I read recently, and you might have heard some of the rumors out there, but I had imagined that this might be possible, but I saw it in print for the first time just a couple of weeks ago, that there is a possibility that Apple could acquire Tesla. Think about Elon Musk with the cash in the bank of an Apple and the technological prowess and the ability to do a business entirely differently than the automotive industry has ever seen before. What would Elon Musk, with the bankroll of Apple, be able to do to this industry? So the risks could come from anywhere. And the riskiest bet is to do nothing at all. And finally, let go. Just let go. Understand that what we are working on right now is the unknown. However, you want to make sure that although some change may outpace us all, the reality is that we're going to be able to keep up in many areas. So collaborate, work with trading partners, work with your key suppliers, alliance partners, and invent the future that never was. That's the key to success in the future, and that's how you avoid losing the race. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. Another really thought-provoking presentation and challenge in many ways to the audience and to the sector. I think we can see those pitfalls of resisting change, and I think the focus on the local plant level, that's something I'm sure in a different way everyone here can relate to. But I think the advantage of logistics experts here is that your raison d'etre is to kind of think in networks, right, and to really connect across networks. So hopefully that sort of thinking will come more naturally to people in this space, and so that sort of trap, as Scott put it, can be avoided. And that's probably the scariest statistic I've heard is 50% of everything we do going through seven companies. So a couple of things to reflect on there. We will have some time for Q&A. As we said, I think this lends itself to some discussion. A quick reminder that we'll also do some live polling just at the end of the session, and that we did put a kind of a jokey question in there for you to already answer if you haven't gone and selected who's got the most innovative haircut, Louis or me. We should have actually put Mr. Trump on that as well, I suppose, because obviously he must be in the running there. And then after we do that vote, we'll obviously go on to the real topical questions. So do take some time to do that. But more kind of importantly for now, let's open it up. We'll have some mics going around the room. So if you just say your name and company. Do we have anyone who'd like to start? We have a question right in the back. Who's got the mic coming to you? One of those millennials in the audience is going to ask the question.
Bruce Harlinghouse. Jim, thank you for raising the issue of cybersecurity. I've been waiting for someone today to bring that subject up. Yesterday I had lunch with an old friend of mine who's the head of the Air Force Research Institute at Maxwell in Montgomery. And as one would hope and expect, that our tax dollars are being spent wisely to invest in just these kinds of things, many of which I won't talk about because they would make Louis' hair curl if I told you about them. But essentially, the military has a vision that a general in the basement of the Pentagon can see what a soldier in a foxhole is seeing in Afghanistan. And in a sense, the soldier is also able to see or benefit from being able to see the big picture that the general sees as well. And take that across all the armed forces, whether they fly or sail or whatever they do. Bottom line is, what they're obsessing about right now is new capabilities inherently bring new vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. In automotive supply chain, we have nightmares about another tsunami, as an example. Disaster 3.0, supply chain disruption, physical disruption 3.0. The capabilities that you're talking about in supply chain 4.0 have tremendous vulnerabilities, mm-hmm. because, and the more dependent we are on those new capabilities, are the people in your business looking at how we're also going to make these new capabilities robust and disaster-proof, for lack of a better term?
Absolutely. You talked about a physical disaster versus an electronic type disaster. I mean, if I could hack into your device and capture this stream, I may be able to steal engineering data, proprietary information about product design. I could falsify testing to make your product unsafe. I could trick you into thinking you're manufacturing quality parts where you're not. Or I can just disrupt it to shut it down. So those are the types of electronical hacks that we're talking about. I myself am not a security expert, but there are experts out in the field that need to work in tandem, in partnership with organizations that are either creating the connected devices, the PLCs that are out there collecting the data, or the monitoring devices to harden them and protect them. Not just at the source, but across the entire infrastructure. So as Scott had alluded to, it's not easy. It's not just a matter of connecting the devices and nirvana happens and you've got the answers to everything. You immediately open yourself up to vulnerability. The home devices that were hacked into, exposing a vulnerability just to do denial of service, interrupted the internet. And being able to do that inside of a manufacturing facility could be an annoyance at worst and catastrophic, or annoyance at best and catastrophic at worst. So yes, there are organizations that are specializing in IoT security, and that is a component. You know, one of the slides that I didn't show was that kind of framework. And there's a foundation of data, there's a foundation of security, foundation of analytics and master data management, but that security cannot be forgotten. It is one of the high-risk areas. And there will be more vulnerabilities exposed in the future than shored up as the technology evolves.
Well, some of the research that we've done at Gartner shows that something on the order of about, we suspect at least 50%, maybe closer to 75 or 80% of all products, sometime in the next 3 to 4 years will be shown to be hackable. So all smart devices, all connected devices will be shown to be hackable. So if you connect a wire or you connect some sort of transceiver of any kind to any product or any device, you can hack it. If it's got a brain, you can hack it. So that kind of gives you the sense of the vulnerability here. But there are different kinds of security layers as well. So there's certainly product security. That's one of the areas, of course. There is information security. There's operations security, physical security, et cetera. So the cyber security, or what we call digital security now, environment is multi-layered, it's multifunctional, it's multi-product, it's multi-domain. It really crosses a number of barriers because they tend to interact with one another. And so from a security protocol point of view, it's not just the IT folks who get involved now, it's everybody from the supply chain, including manufacturing and logistics and so forth, materials management, and then all of the folks in IT and on the product side need to really work together and collaborate to identify how to understand the nature of the risks that are out there, to mitigate them to the extent that they can, but also understand from a Pareto point of view, which are the really important ones. You're not going to be able to unplug everything and just make them standalone. So the question then becomes, what are the really, from a scenario point of view, what are the real risks, and then how do you mitigate those to the degree that you can, and putting into place those kinds of strategies.
Question from my side, because I've been having some conversations with some heads of logistics and supply chain at automakers lately, talking about the sort of structure of their organizations and how they're organized. Scott, I know you've done work with car makers looking at topics like this, on areas like S&OP and things like that. What does, well, first of all, are supply chain organizations in the automotive industry today fit for purpose, so to speak, for dealing with the kinds of shifts and changes that we're seeing? And if they're not, or if they're kind of on the way, what do they have to look like? What changes and steps need to be taken in those organizations?
What I have detected, which is really, I think, great progress by automotive, particularly in the last let's say 4 to 5 years, is a recognition that no one is an island. I can't remember exactly the quote, Jim, but you wrote it down. There are no outsiders anymore.
Yep.
And I really think that's true, and I think there's a recognition across the automotive industry that there are no longer any outsiders. So governance models like sales and operations planning, S&OP, some call it strategic planning, others call it integrated business planning. Whatever you call that model, that governance model, is becoming much more common across the automotive industry, not just among the OEMs, however. We see many of the larger tier ones and some of the tier twos going hard after S&OP as well. And the reason for that is because it gets the whole organization out in front of the kinds of decisions that have to be made in view of some customer-focused outcome, but also out ahead of the business decisions that need to be made so that you can be assured that you're making money. So for things like, for example, the digital issues, whether we're talking about security, or we're talking about product, or we're talking about some of the opportunities that are created from the digital environment, certainly that information adds a richness and a relevance to some of the decisions that are being made from a time-based perspective as well. So I think what we have seen is a number of significant improvements in maturity overall for the industry, and I think that is going to set up the industry well when we talk about things like the digital revolution that's already upon us.
And to answer the question about how well prepared suppliers are, over the past 2 weeks, I've probably met with 5 different tier ones. And they're all at various levels. But on one extreme, there was a corporation that is embracing it. They're actually hiring millennials to go in and look at the operation from a usability standpoint and a interaction with the technology, the human technology interaction, embracing the collection of data, very concerned about security. And their finance organization is very concerned about the cost, so they want to understand the business case. On the other hand, I had a meeting that lasted 10 minutes with the CEO and the CIO. And they said, we make X. I'm not going to say what X is because there's very few of them. This is not going to impact us. We're just going to keep making X. So thank you very much, but we don't need to put a strategy together for something that is not going to impact us. I shook my head and said, I'll either talk to you in 3 years when you're on the auction block or when somebody absorbs you, because you know, it's not a matter of you're not drinking the Kool-Aid, but the world is changing. And again, as Scott said, it's hard. You don't have to do it all at once, but identify those areas of opportunity where the combination of technology and data and innovation are going to allow you to come up on the winning side of that gap. Because there will be winners and losers. Somebody will absorb it. Somebody from the outside, an unknown entity that you don't even think is in your business is going to swoop in and say, this is going to augment either a product or a service that we want, and we're going to absorb you.
One of the areas of research we do is what's called the digital vision, or the digital business vision. And what we see leaders doing is creating this visionary statement, much like a corporate vision statement, but it weaves in the idea of how digital capabilities are going to enable some kind of a future outcome. And we call it internally to Gartner, and we talk about it with Gartner clients, what we call the industry vision. But it's each company thinking about how it's going to play in the industry in a broader way. How digital will shape them, shape their customers, shape the industry, and their role in leading, driving, and/or responding to those changes. So we see that actually happening more often. And the companies who are leading are the ones who grasp that in a few simple words, the nature of how digital will change the world and change them. So certainly think about that as a starting point for trying to figure out what digital is going to mean. Start with an industry vision that lays in the customer, lays in your role in delivering that customer value, and then from that point start to build the strategies and then focusing on the right sort of key enablers to get to those outcomes.
Any questions, comments from the audience? So picking up a little on the winners and losers side of things, I mean, when we talk about other scary statistics, and this is obviously a bit broader of a theme now than clearly just automotive supply chain, but we talk about sort of mass automation and the number of jobs that can or will go, maybe. You see many statistics, and Scott, obviously we can question them, 30%, 40%. When we look at this sector, I mean, is this something that the companies you're dealing with are looking at and preparing for, that a huge share of their workforce could go? Is it an opportunity for areas like we have a driver shortage or labor shortages in some place? I mean, should we be afraid? and how do we deal with that? Because we see ramifications across the globe right now in terms of the backlash that has come from Industry 3.0, let alone 4.0. So how do people in this room, how do they think about that, looking into the future?
So do you mind if I comment?
Go ahead.
Start with? So I love being a consultant because I can say it depends all the time, and it actually means something. It depends. So, I mean, exactly. Thank you. I'm done. The jobs there are jobs that are going to be lost. I mean, I don't think that's something that's deniable. But there's also going to be jobs that are going to be gained. And the typical assembly line worker is going to be automated. I mean, there's going to be plants that are going to be 100% automated. I think that I'll see that in my lifetime. But I also know that just because they're automated doesn't mean that there aren't going to be jobs. It's not like robots are going to swoop in and take every single job. Somebody mentioned, I forget who it was, that somebody's aha moment was that accountants are going to go away. Yeah, it will. I believe that too. I think that the idea of crunching numbers, just like the idea of picking up a part and moving it or hitting 2 buttons to activate something because that's what the law calls for right now, those jobs are going to go away. But it doesn't mean that the new jobs, if accountants go away, the computer, the AI systems can go through and find interesting pieces of information, but somebody has to do the analysis. Somebody has to know how to use the data to make decisions. And I don't think that I'm going to see in my lifetime computers making the complex decisions that the human brain is required to make. So the jobs are going to change. That's why universities are gearing up and having new programs around analytics new IoT programs, Industry 4.0 classes that you can take to prep the upcoming generation for what those jobs of the future are going to look like. I'll add one more thing, and then I'll let Scott get a word in edgewise here. Who uses Uber? Just show of hands. Okay. Who uses a taxi? I make a point of every time I get in an Uber car, every time I get in a taxi, of asking them how long they think the taxi industry will be around. And for the Uber drivers, we're sitting at about 2 to 3 years. They think that the taxi service will go away in major cities. For the taxi drivers, we're at about 90% it will be here forever. There's a huge gap in perception. Reality, I'm leaning towards the side of the Uber drivers. So the taxi industry is losing a whole bunch of jobs, but there's a whole nother business model that somebody thought up that said, I'm gonna create a business, and it's gonna be like taxis, and we're gonna replace taxis, but I'm not gonna buy a single car. I don't need an office to start with. I'm gonna build an app, and people are gonna come to me with their own cars and say, can I work for you and drive my own car? The job's changed. The business model changed. There's still people employed, but the industry is different. That same thing's happening within manufacturing.
Yeah, there's I think one disagreement I would have, minor disagreement, when you talked about there are certain decisions that the machines won't make. I think there are many decisions that machines will make. I think, on the other hand, there will be decisions that are made that require human empathy. So one thing machines don't have is empathy. So the decision to start a war, do you want the machine to do that, or you want a human being to do that? Shut off life support.
Depends on if you're Skynet or not.
That's true. The decision to shut off life support to a medical patient. Do you want a machine to make that decision, or do you want a person to make that decision? So I think there are decisions out there that will be made by human beings because human beings have empathy. But I think there are a lot of decisions that are made already and have been made for years. The decision to fly a rocket, machines make that decision. They have for 40 years. That's a pretty complex decision with many, many thousands of parameters that have to all line up before the button is pressed to send the vehicle into orbit. So there are lots of really complex decisions, and it's those more complex decisions, actually, that the ones that machines are typically more capable of making. But there are some caveats. As the data becomes more prevalent and the amount of information becomes deeper and the relationships more complex, the human brain can't, even a room full of human brains, couldn't possibly get our own minds wrapped around the complexity of the decision. My own view is, I think, and this is borne out by some of the research that we've done, what we probably need are some better algorithms. For those of you who are engineers who've ever done, for example, structural dynamics, you probably have done a lot of things, or if you might have been, for example, even electrical engineers, you might be familiar with things like Z-transforms and Euler-Cauchy equations and Laplace transforms and all those kinds of things, Fourier transforms. Those are all equations, math models that allow us to find simplicity in really complex math and really complex data, really complex events. And it's those kinds of tools that I think will probably need more mathematicians to help us sort out so that we can stay on top of more of that really deep and rich information that just becomes more plentiful the longer we go on. One of the other things that I'll point out, and I think this gets back to one of the points that Chris made, is around kind of the nature of the business models themselves. One of the things that we see already done among semiconductor manufacturers around high-tech and electronics, pharmaceuticals, life sciences, consumer products, and so forth, is that they have become what they call fabless. So the brand owner, the OEM, no longer owns the manufacturing environments themselves. So what we may find as companies become more automated, as factories become more automated, the factory of the future, from the point of view of an OEM, may be no factory at all. Now, obviously, there are bargaining unit issues, and all of that kind of comes to play in the immediate term. But in the long term, does it make any sense for the OEM, the car maker, to own those plants anymore? Or should they outsource all those things? I think based upon what we're seeing from some competition, among the Teslas of the world and so on, it probably won't be that long, maybe 5 or 10 years, before there is an OEM that outsources all of its manufacturing, owns only the marketing, the design, the engineering, and maybe some of the manufacturing for those pieces that really matter to them, like Tesla and the batteries, for example, and the motors, the things that really differentiate themselves from others. And I think it makes sense. I think as an industry, when you look at the fact that the difference between the OEMs, if you worked for one OEM, you probably don't really need to know what the other OEMs are doing from a manufacturing point of view. You probably could guess 90 to 95% of it. So it's only that last 5 or 10% that really makes the difference. So if it's 95% common, does every OEM need to manufacture their own vehicles anymore? That's a question that the industry will probably have to come to terms with, and it's going to be driven in part, I think, by this digital revolution.
Good points, I agree.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's put Jim's kind of Uber and for the sake of balance, Lyft versus taxi question a little bit to the test here with our red and green cards. So green, if you think your job will be automated, your job and your company could be or will be automated away within your lifetime, and red if you don't think it's possible that you could be automated. So red for not automated, green for automated. Looks like a lot of taxi drivers in the audience. Clearly, I didn't have a card, so I couldn't say if a journalist's job could be automated. I have a few bosses who are around this conference. I probably don't want to have them hear about all the robotics that's happening in journalism at the moment either. But we have to we want to challenge and see what's happening. And Scott's point there about maybe OEMs stop manufacturing or don't own the manufacturing. Obviously, there's still a supply chain there. There's still logistics that need to be thought through and involved that may change and evolve. But I think you have to keep in mind how this might evolve and what role you will continue to play in that sector, despite any of these changes. Maybe if there's any other last questions from the audience, we have one right in the middle we'll take there, and then we can move on to maybe the polling.
Lynn Failing, Kimmel and Associates. You gave primarily, first of all, a wonderful couple of stories, but the slide was primarily technical, and you painted a picture of renegades and revolutionaries and millennials, an interesting combination. How do, especially in the big corporate world that most of us work in, how do we ensure that the culture of the corporations themselves innovate in bringing succession planning themselves? Because the technology creates revolution. How do we create that and the difference is, the way I put it down is we're moving from command and control in terms of our corporate structures to what I would describe as create and consent. How do we create that transformation in a leadership role in the organizations that we work with, considering the pace of change that's happening?
I'll maybe start on this one. I would add one more, not just create and consent. I would also say orchestrate. That's probably the third one I would add. But I would also say, to your point, how do corporations make that cultural transformation? Leadership, leadership, leadership. If I think about one of the companies, we all probably, a show of green cards. How many of you use Amazon? Everybody pretty much, a couple of no's. Amazon has what they call their leadership principles, 14 of them. And they drive their entire company by these leadership principles. Among them is invent. Invent. Another is to have what's called a bias for action. A bias for action means, hey, we tend to be, although the automotive industry is becoming less risk averse, we tend as supply chain people to be generally more risk averse. What Amazon would say is there are very few decisions that any of us will ever make that we cannot go back and change our minds later and go in a different direction. At the end of the day, if we break some glass, does it really matter? So those are the kinds of things that, could we have an interruption? Could things be difficult for a while? Of course. But bias for action is one of the things that is a characteristic, from Amazon's point of view, of good leadership. So I think leadership is probably one of the things that really does matter. And being open and I think the openness is one of those things as well, being open to new ideas and figuring out, okay, what is this going to mean? Let's start moving sooner rather than later.
Yeah, very good answer. Very little to add to that. I would say, though, that, to quote you again, it's hard. It's not, there is no silver bullet. I'll go back to my consulting answer, right? It depends. Every organization is different. They all have their own, we talked about some of the challenges. I think it was Subaru that talked about politics and so forth. All of those come into play. Every environment is different. But it's got to be a top-down driven approach. It has to have the support and endorsement. And you have to be comfortable making hard decisions. And sometimes those decisions end up breaking glass, as Scott had mentioned. But you have to be comfortable doing that. And again, I go back to my, fail fast, succeed faster. Once you get the momentum, don't let it stop. And there are going to be all types of people and processes and technology that are going to want to stop it. But you got to keep gaining that momentum. And again, the concept that was mentioned earlier around the 5 pillars, and he likes to call them priorities. I actually like priorities as well. Who said that? Yeah. I like to call them priorities as well because priorities can change, and you may break glass. Pillars, if you move a pillar or remove a pillar, something's going to crumble. It's typically holding something up, where priorities allow you to set that direction. And that's just a subtle frame of reference within your mind, but that's the way that you have to think. So.
I think that point on maintaining momentum, fighting against the things that are hard in your organization, breaking glass, kind of like a Greek wedding celebration of kinds. That's a good point to sort of end on this sort of content in this session and this day, because I think those are all messages that have really resonated across everyone today in terms of the importance of that. We'll continue to discuss it throughout the conference tomorrow morning. We'll have some speakers also addressing talent and further training aspects as well, which are so key. But before we move on to the sort of live polling, let's give our panel a hand of applause. Thank you very much. You can stay or you can go. So it'll take a couple minutes. We'll do our live voting as promised. So just a quick reminder, I think we can pop those details back on the screen. This is how you log in to our live service. You can follow that link if you haven't done already. And you log in using your email address and your delegate number, which is printed on your badge. You would have also received an email this morning at around 8 o'clock giving you a link on that. So it's just, again, a chance for us to pick up what you're thinking. We're however many are in the room here. We have a few other people, time zone depending, around the world who would be watching as well. Quick note: if you're on a smartphone, if you're on I guess you don't have to say that anymore now. If you're on a phone and you're using it, you click on the vote tab. There's several tabs you'll see. So click on the vote tab, and then that'll bring you to where the question will come up. If you're using an iPad or a laptop, the vote will just appear down towards the bottom of the feed where you have the live stream and the comment section. And I always have to say this again, but anyone who's watching outside the room, there's a slight delay between what I'm saying and what you're seeing on the screen. That's because of my tendency to swear, so they need to have a couple of minutes to beep it out. But in this case, don't listen to what I say as if you would anyway, but just see when the question comes up, vote there. So hopefully those who want to participate have had some time to log on, and you can see our questions before you. We can bring back up our very pressing question of the day, which we wanted to start out with just to get you going a little bit. And it's, of course, the question: which of your moderators today has the most innovative haircut? Is it Louis? Is it me? And depending on the answer here, I may need to go see a barber in time for tomorrow's show. So if you could give your vote now, we'll just test to make sure that everything's working. So the system is working. You've made Louis very happy. I guess I'm going to have to go for a shave tonight and see what happens in the morning. Luckily, we saw a billboard yesterday for $2 hair grafts in Atlanta, so I'm not sure how many you get per graft, but we're going to give that a try. So Louis wins that one, but now on to some real questions. We have some questions coming in from our sponsors, and then we got a few other questions from our team here. So first question is from our premier sponsor, Ryder, and it's, do you feel as though inbound automotive supply chain is leading or lagging behind in technology and business or business intelligence? Is it, yes, leading in comparison to other sectors? Is it lagging? Or would you say it's roughly on par with other sectors? So leading, lagging, on par. So you're all a little bit pessimistic on the industry. 61% say that it's lagging, 29% that it's on par, only 10% see automotive as leading in sort of the business intelligence and technology, so Industry 4.0. So we got some work to do to catch up, according to the audience. That's why I hope you all continue to join us tomorrow so we can discuss it further. Next question is from our global sponsor, CDC. And it's, as the automotive supply chain is becoming ever more global, what do you see as the biggest challenge for your activities? Is it volatile shipping costs? Is it customs issues? Is it increased lead time from supplier to plant? Is it lack of global standardization in logistics? Or is it reduced control of your supply chain? So which of these is giving you headaches? Technology doesn't always help, does it? Here we are. So, lack of global standardization in logistics comes out on top at 56%, but followed by reduced control of your supply chain. So there, it's probably kind of can relate to some of the technology things we can talk about here when we see proliferation of systems and lack of standards across companies and plants. So that's certainly a big issue that we would recognize in automotive logistics. Next question is from ProTrans. So it's, how frequently do you utilize predictive analytics to plan your supply chain? Do you never use it? Do you use it once a year, annually? Do you do it quarterly? Or do you do it daily? So how are you using your data? So this is sort of kind of roughly matches up with the 61% sort of lagging in some of these areas of business intelligence. Beginning 41% never use predictive analytics, 24% just once a year, and a few others doing it much more frequently, 20% using it daily. So obviously some are getting ahead of their using data more strategically, but a good amount of you still never touch it at all or very rarely do it. Next question from our sponsor, Syncrian. Which things will most change the future of logistics? Is it electrification? Is it autonomous vehicles? Will it be political change or dynamics as they come into play? Or will it be infrastructure investment? So which of these will change logistics most? Give us a moment while we do our predictive analytics back there. 54% of you say autonomous vehicles will have the most impact, followed by politics, perhaps not so surprising in the current environment, with electrification down at the bottom. So push towards autonomous vehicles, perhaps we might also broaden that with autonomy that in other parts of the supply chain is not just necessarily the vehicle, will be obviously a major driving force. So a few more questions on trends coming from automotive logistics here. It's a little one just to get a sense of what you're feeling about the economy and its impact on the supply chain. So over the next year, the economy in the automotive market in the US and North America will have what impact on supply chain and logistics capacity? Will you see higher investment and expanded capacity? Do you expect some investment, maybe stable or slightly higher capacity? So little to no investment, or in fact cuts to investment and capacity, as perhaps we head towards something of a downturn. So it's sort of more subdued, but more than half see some investment with fairly stable or slightly higher capacity, followed by little to no investment. So it sort of obviously aligns with the current market forecast, which sort of see stable, maybe slight decline as we've seen in the first couple of months. But whilst people aren't terribly bullish, so not too negative either. The last place is actually seeing cuts, so we're probably stable at this level, clearly at a very high level as well. So coming back a little bit to some of how you see the market changing, how long does this audience think it will take before autonomous vehicles make up 25% of new car sales and production? Do you see that happening in the next 5 years, within the next 5 years, in the next 6 to 10 years, in the next 11 to 15 years, in 16 to 20 years, or somewhere beyond 20 years? So 11 to 15 years, so that's what, 70-odd% roughly within 15 years. So it's fairly long time, fairly long term from the point of view of this audience. Not too many people seeing it happening sooner, but then also not many seeing it happening much further than that. So that's, for this young audience at least, well within our lifetimes. There are some predictions that would see it faster as well, I'm sure. For digitalization and the Internet of Things and the supply chain logistics, my company is, and perhaps this will reflect some of what we've seen earlier, my company is investing significantly to implement new technology and processes. My company is investing cautiously and gradually rolling out new technology and processes. My company is trialing some technology in a few isolated areas, but my company is hardly making any notable investments or changes to operations yet. So what kind of approach are you taking to this? Okay, well, early on we heard we were lagging, 60-odd% thought we were lagging, but the good news is nearly 40% are actually investing significantly to try to catch up, and another 28% cautiously. Only 14% are hardly doing anything at all. So maybe some more conversations to be had with the panelists on stage here, but there obviously is a move towards trying to catch up, perhaps where the industry is lagging. So for automotive logistics, what will be the biggest benefits from advanced digitalization and connectivity? Do you see the advantages being more labor automation, whether it's drivers, warehouses, in plant, etc., more frequent and flexible network planning and optimization? Is it more automated administration, things like invoicing and customs clearance, other areas of compliance? Or is it reducing errors in handling or data? Or is it increasing the visibility of shipments and materials products? So what do you see as some of the biggest benefits, as the biggest benefit? pretty tight race here between frequent and flexible network planning and optimization, followed pretty closely by increasing visibility of shipments and materials and products. Perhaps not too surprising for a logistics audience to see it in those terms, but that's clearly where we see some of the biggest benefits coming in. Labor automation further down, and some of the bottom, very few people looking at the biggest advantage being just the paperwork, even if that's some clear areas where we can see the impacts already coming in pretty quickly. I think this is our last question before we move on to the gala dinner. So what would be the use of more connected technology and automation of, what will the use of more connected technology and automation in logistics mean for 3PLs, so third-party logistics providers and logistics service providers more specifically? Will it require them to become more data and technology companies more than they are transport companies? Will it give them the opportunity to further optimize their operations and costs? Will it have little impact overall on the type of services and business model these companies offer? Or could it indeed put their business at severe risk of decline or obsolescence? Well, it's a dead heat. So we got to become industry here, we have to become data companies, basically, as well as it will help optimize operations and costs. So no one sees having no impact, which is probably good. You've got the message there. 25% of you see some pretty severe risk, though. So probably the message is you have to become more data companies if you don't want to face those risks. So that's it for the voting. I hope that you found that interesting. We'll make those results available to you towards the end of the conference as well, so you can get a feel for what your peers are thinking. And thanks again for a great day, for your discussion and participation in the audience. Now, for the fun bit, we'll have buses leaving outside. It's only a 10-minute drive or so to the Atlanta History Center to take us to the writer-hosted gala dinner. We've also, if you are driving, we'll have some, you can get in directions at the reg desk. But we'll be leaving fairly shortly, so look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.